it's time to put our trust in people who actually deserve it. And a lot of times in any one person's life, the people you actually know you can trust are people at the local level. And so I think, it's time to kind of start there. And, that sort of leads into the whole idea of like decentralization also, that like the more power goes back to the local level, the less power the national or state or whatever has, And there needs to be a towards the public and towards the people. And we can't just wait for the right politician to be put in charge of the state to give that to us, right? We have to do that ourselves, because as we've historically seen, the state, whether it's capitalist or communist, accumulates more money and power for itself.
With that said, your neighbours Argentina, Milei's recently gone into power, and
Yes.
it does appear to be somebody who is trying to decentralize power to some extent.
You would think so,
I say
but
that guarded.
you would
I say
think
that
so.
guarded.
Yeah, you should, because the guy he put in charge of the finance ministry is the former top guy in Latin America for JP Morgan, which are also the Jeffrey Epstein banks. And personally, people that have been pillaging Latin America monetarily for a long time. And I mean, supposedly he was going to dollarize. Now he's not. But essentially, most of the people he's put in charge of the economy are people that were already in government under Mauricio Macri, who is the administration before this most recent outgoing administration, who under them, there was a major economic crisis in Argentina. I think it was like 2015. So these aren't necessarily anti-establishment people.
Yeah, wasn't that kind of a coalition though, in that the only way you could get into power was by forming a relation with the Macri administration?
Well, you could argue that in Milei's case, right, because he wanted the center-right politician who was running Patricia Bullrich to back him, and her support of Milei was brokered by Macri himself. You can, but ultimately Milei is signing off on it, right? And Milei is the one that just went to the U.S. and had meetings with Bill Clinton, and has had chummy meetings with the head of the IMF and all of this stuff. And as someone who knows a lot of people who are from Argentina and who has been to Argentina and Argentina, I can tell you that people in Argentina, there's nothing they hate more than the IMF.
Of course.
They hate the IMF, as they rightly should. But what has the IMF been trying to do in Argentina? Well, first of all, Argentina had an economic collapse in 2001, which you can very effectively argue was engineered by the administration in charge during the 1990s, Carlos Menem, whose economy minister was Domingo Cavallo. And Domingo Cavallo was part of the inspiration for Milei's dollarization plan and explicitly backed Milei's campaign, by the way. Anyway, the economy collapses in 2001. The guy in charge of Argentina at the time puts Cavallo back in charge of the economy when it's collapsed. And then all this stuff starts to happen with all these crazy IMF deals. And obviously, to deal with the economic collapse, central bank policy starts going haywire in Argentina, but you could argue that really goes back to the 1980s, if not a little bit earlier. A lot of the stuff that's taken Argentina to where it is now it's not just it wasn't just the administration that's leaving power. This has been something decades in the making. But anyway, what has the IMF been trying to do in Argentina? The same thing they've done to countries all over the world, debt slavery.
Yeah.
And more specifically, forcing states to sell public assets to foreign private companies. Yeah. So
I just got back from Africa and seen it.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if you know. Do you know Alex Gladstein, the Human Rights Foundation?
I'm familiar.
Yeah, he wrote a book about structural adjustment and how the IMF indebts these nations to essentially just rape and pillage the resources of these countries.
So that is what the IMF has been trying to do in Argentina, and there's a couple of different things they want. One thing that gets overlooked a lot, besides gas energy resources in Argentina, is the fact that there has been interest for a long time in taking a large amount of Argentinian territory and turning it into its own new state. And so they were trying to do that, the IMF, through what they call debt for land swaps, which you could argue are now being retooled for the modern era as debt for climate swaps, which is a new thing that exists. But anyway, the IMF, again, has been trying to take these state-owned assets and give them to private people. Well, essentially, a lot of Malay's proposals, including dollarization with foreign financing, or some of the stuff put forward by Luis Caputo, his finance minister, will basically sell off those same assets faster to the same foreign, corporations and financial institutions that would have gotten it through the IMF anyway. So it's not really surprising why Malay is so chummy with the IMF since he won the election. I'm pretty soured on Malay, frankly. I think it reminds me a lot of Trump in the sense of like the campaign energy, like campaigning as this big anti-establishment guy and getting a lot of his base really energized by insulting the political establishment, which deserves to be insulted. They're garbage, right? But in doing so, he gains their trust, but he's putting people from the political establishment in charge, including of the stuff he promised to overhaul, specifically the finance ministries and the central bank. So we'll see what happens, but I would definitely be very skeptical of Malay going forward, because the idea that he's an anarcho-capitalist and he's putting the former Latin American head of JP Morgan and Deutsche Bank in charge of what happens to the economy, that doesn't seem very anarcho-capitalist to me. That seems crony-capitalist.
Right, I will be even more guarded. Okay, so I interrupted you to ask you for more about AI, and you were going on to tell me about the co-opting of the internet. Can we go back down there?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, there's been a push for several years, but now it's gaining an insane amount of momentum and steam. But it really goes back several years. And the goal is to have a regulated internet, which means the end of online privacy and anonymity. And they want to do this by having people link a government-issued ID to their internet access and internet activity.
Who is that?
So in the U.S., it's come from the government, but it's not. A lot of government policy, whether it's about this or something else, doesn't come organically from the government. It comes from think tanks. It comes from groups like that, or even the WEF, the World Economic Forum, that are then given to politicians, and politicians legislate and enact it, and the state enforces it. But it's not necessarily the ideas of the legislature and the state itself, these policies. And more often than not, these think tanks are funded by corporations and billionaires and all of these guys. And they also own the politicians, so it's really them creating the policy. And they use the state as an enforcer to force it on the public, right? So that's, I guess, the global public-private partnership is what my colleague calls they, right? And I think it's pretty fair. He puts the BIS at the top level of the pyramid. But this policy, one of the earliest iterations of it, at least in the United States, was during the Obama administration. They called it a driver's license for the internet. The idea of, in order to access the internet, when you set up, internet connection at your house, the internet service provider links all of your internet traffic to your ID. And in doing so, the government and the signals intelligence arm or intelligence agency of the government then has access to not just everything you're posting and writing online, but also everything you read and consume online.
And everything you buy.
And everything you buy. Oh, totally. I mean, this whole push is completely related to ending financial anonymity and financial privacy as well. It's a completely interrelated thing. And I've done pretty extensive deep dives on this going back to probably 2021, because it's very tied up with how they're likely to force this regulated internet on the populace, because they're not just going to be like, let's do this now. I mean, people aren't going to go along with it, so they need some sort of event that gets people angry and afraid and panicking in order to stick it through. So basically, this is going to be folded into, I guess, what I would call a Cyber Patriot Act. Legislation pushed through in the U.S. after September 11th, 2001, right? A lot of which wasn't necessarily related to anything to do with 9/11, but was a huge power grab by the state taking advantage opportunistically of the panic after 9/11. So they need some sort of event like that to ram all this stuff through. But the plans have been on the books for a very long time, and it's not just the U.S., it's really everywhere. I mean, I think in the UK you have something called the Online Safety Bill, that's quite
We have
similar.
so much stuff. We have so much stuff now.
Yeah.
So yes, we have the online safety bill, which was the death of end-to-end encryption. But we've also had this week. Yeah, we've had this week Rishi Sunak come out and say he wants to restrict social media for anyone under 16 as well, which is entirely unenforceable. But it feels like I'm.
Well, you
I'm
have to link it then to your government issued ID so they can verify what your age is. They have all these different excuses.
Exactly.
A lot of it, like the online, they'll say, oh, it's about protecting children. But really, it's about ending encryption. Enforcement in the UK and the US have been trying to do so hard for years and years and years. I mean, Bill Barr, who was Attorney General under Trump in the US, was like, that was his main policy goal, was to end encryption. And he talked about it all the time, but a lot of people didn't really pay attention, I guess. But in the UK, of course, as I'm sure you're aware, the UK national security state and the security state are very intertwined, specifically signals intelligence, the whole Five Eyes alliance, which is obviously includes more countries, but it's UK and US dominated, obviously. It's not like Australia and New Zealand are running the show, you know? Yeah. So,
I don't even think it's the UK running the show. I think it's the US running the show, and we may be part of it, but we're really subservient to the US.
Well, it to a big extent, yeah, but then you also have a major like financial center that you could argue, has a lot of the city of London, right? There's a lot of speculation about, Britain's still holding a significant amount of the seat of global financial power, but leave that discussion for another time because that's probably not, probably have to prep a little more for that kind of conversation, honestly. But so in terms of what we're talking about with government, regulation of the internet, and all of this, it's coming, right? We're already seeing the first signs of it here. There's an obvious push to censor more speech and link people's speech to their ID and have it more surveillable than ever before. Gutting encryption, why do they want to do that? So they can read everything that you say and all your transactions, follow them all. There's a similar effort in crypto and specifically with Bitcoin to criminalize mixers and criminalize any sort of service that affords you increased financial privacy. And that's only going to escalate.
They have criminalized mixers because, I know of at least 3 cases where people are either tied up for a multi-year lawsuits for the creation of mixers. They're money launderers.
No, right. So it's already started, but what I'm trying to say is that where they want to take this, if anyone uses a mixer, they can go after you. That's what they want to set up. They don't want anyone to have financial privacy or online privacy anymore. And that's what part of this agenda about a regulated internet is. And it directly ties in with stuff like a central bank digital currency, at least what people are concerned about a CBDC for, which is the surveillance capability and the programmability aspect. It's all tied up with this effort to regulate the internet, which isn't really fair to say it's regulating the internet. It's more like taking complete control of the internet, a complete coup of the internet for unprecedented surveillance and control of people's online lives. At the same time that you have these same entities pushing for people to live their lives online as much as possible as part of the fourth industrial revolution and all of this other stuff. Like we saw in the COVID era, we're locking down, you can't go out and do stuff in the physical world, you have to be online as much as possible. Education's online, work is online, as much of your life as possible has to be online now because you can't go in person to the bank. You should order your groceries through your phone and all of this. So they're pushing us more and more into the digital realm, and at the same time preparing to take more control of the digital realm
Bunch of bougie dogs all
than
over
they
the
have now by
place. All of them
significant
got nice
degrees.
haircuts.
And it's not, that's not a coincidence. I'm sorry if you think that's coincidental, that's very
You don't want to
naive.
be a hobo dog.
Let me just ask you something. So on this, I'm following the path of everything you're saying and agreeing and recognizing it's coming. I always try and think, why? Why does it happen? Is it an organic system of bad incentives which appeal to the greed of certain individuals that drive us towards these bad decisions, like the centralization and control of power?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it some evil plan? Is it malice? Is it I try and understand, and I always come out on the side of thinking that it's just a system of poor incentives, the way humans are, the way we act, our greed that drives us towards this. But is there like a deep state of malice?
Well, okay, so obviously when you're talking about the powers that be, there's competing factions, right? Not all of them agree, but they agree about a lot of the stuff. And a lot of the way these people operate isn't that similar to how people rulers operated hundreds of years ago. You know, they want complete and control of money and political power and power more broadly, because then they can do whatever they want for themselves and have a double standard for themselves, but force other people to live a certain way to support their lifestyle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what we're seeing here is an effort to use technology to entrench that in unprecedented ways so that there's no more need to worry about the peasants revolting, right? I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. So as an example, you know, this push for a regulated internet and the online anonymity and all of that is directly related to the fact that it's a mathematical inevitability that our debt-based monetary system will collapse at some point. And that the banking system, particularly Wall Street, and you know its global equivalents, have engaged in an unprecedented degree of malfeasance and corruption and insane financial gambling activities. And just like 2008, right? That's going to explode at some point. But in 2008, people knew it was the banks and they were mad at the banks, weren't they? So if you're the banks and you know that's going to happen again, and you're in bed with the intelligence agencies of the government, or in the case of the U.S., you own the central bank, right? You don't want that to happen again. So how do you blame? Do you find a way to blame somebody else for the financial floating? And when you bring the financial system back, what do these people, you know, people like Jamie Dimon and all these top bankers, like what is their ideal scenario for like money and how people interact with it and use money? Well, being able to grift as much as you want and take as much as you want from the people under you without them knowing or complaining, because I mean that's what they've been doing for decades.
No.
So they want to keep doing that. They don't want to change their behavior. So they want a way to be able to steal from the underclass as much as possible without the underclass complaining or revolting, and control how they spend their money, and control their financial and other behavior so that they can make their place on the top. So what we're having is the engineering of a neo-feudal society where you have the small upper class and then a massive underclass that the upper class can manipulate and control and do whatever they want with as they see fit. And so that's what I think, a lot of these various initiatives we're seeing for unprecedented control and surveillance are aimed at. And the goal is to use technology, whether it's AI or any of these other emerging technologies, to be able to do that, because obviously there's so much more of us than there are of them. And so in order to scale what they want to scale, to be able to deal with the huge difference in size between their class and our class, they feel like, you know, they need these emerging technologies. They need AI. And that's why I see AI as a largely negative, because the people that want to do this are the ones setting it up and programming it and deciding what its objectives are.
Okay. See, that takes a big shift, because I mean, I definitely buy into a bad system of incentives. I do, but then I try and imagine a scenario.
Okay, well, you're gonna have to wait.
I'm trying to think. There's a group of people who are looking at us peasants. I think they need to control us. The best way to do it, to essentially eviscerate the middle class and. But
they've been doing that, and the money has been going up.
That. But I sometimes wonder, again, is that just the bad incentives? Like poor governments, election cycles mean that they have to keep printing with dry.
Yeah. Like who designs those incentives and prevents them from being changed?
Well, I just wonder if they're the incentives are in us as humans. Like greedy people who are close to the spigot can print it themselves, and then it has these outcomes. But
right, sure. But I think, you know, how do people get into the elite? Not everyone that's in the elite today was born into it, right? I mean, they cultivate into their ranks people that are like, you know, psychopaths. right?
To get a tap on the shoulder.
Controlled by greed and all of that stuff to come flesh it out, right? Or people they think are talented, they think they can use, and that will, you know, if they're offered a big piece of the pie or a big enough piece of the pie, will join them, right? So it's not like these people are the people that have been there since the 1500s, and you know they're all still that today. You know what I mean? But I mean, in terms of the behavior of like a ruling elite, it's very similar to what it was in the feudal era, like in the Dark Ages. Which again, how did the Dark Ages succeed so successfully in that? Extreme control of information in the church, right? No one had to read and write but them, so it was a control of information and also of money. And we're going to that same paradigm again, but you know, the modern era, so all this technology is going to try and set up those systems for us. And I think people need to be really aware of all these, you know, in the next couple of years, without a doubt, there's going to be these events, whether it's like COVID or 9/11 or whatever, they're not going to be the same as those, but they're going to be these big events that generate a lot of fear and panic, and mainstream media is going to be traumatizing people with it, and they're going to sell a particular solution. And when it comes to the internet or the financial system, they're going to make the enemy privacy. They're going to make the enemy privacy 100%. And the solution is going to be digital IDs and programmable surveillance. It doesn't have to be CBDCs, by the way. I mean, CBDCs, I think most people know, are going to be that, but it doesn't. It's not just CBDCs. There is a goal. There is a push from the banks themselves, some of the most powerful banks in the world, to have, at least in some countries, a different system that's not a CBDC. Because with a CBDC, they can't do fractional reserve banking. And so, tokens are all about tokenizing deposits. You can make those programmable, you can surveil them, and it's really just like a CBDC. But the bank controls all the reserves, you know. And maybe they'll bank some of their reserves at the Fed, or whatever, but they can still do fractional reserve banking and credit freezing and all of this stuff, and not actually have to keep a one-to-one peg of reserves like CBDCs are like a fiat peg stablecoin. And so there's a push for that too at an international level. It's not just in the U.S., but it's definitely happening in the U.S. And I would argue that's one of the reasons that you have the Federal Reserve, which is again owned by Wall Street banks in the U.S., being like, we're not going to do a direct issued CBDC, and freedom advocates in the U.S. are like, yeah, the Fed's on our side because of that. No, it's not. The Fed is 100% always on the side of Wall Street banks, and Wall Street banks only don't want a CBDC because they don't want to give the Federal Reserve their power. They want to keep their power, and they want to keep doing fractional reserve banking.
So this is why they fight for my world, or while I'm in the Bitcoin, because that is an opt-out from the system of control, and opt-out from the system of money printing, and you know, we had that weird. I mean, you must have seen the other week with Elizabeth Warren and Jamie Dimon, where it was so obvious it was a rehearsed conversation.
Of course.
The setup of Elizabeth Warren's question, and actually it came out. We saw the Freedom of Information Act release, whereby with Chairman Gensler, she'd been sending questions in advance and saying he's okay. So my assumption is she did exactly the same with Jamie Dimon and the leaders of all those other banks. But it was kind of this weird thing because, you know, this is Elizabeth Warren, and even as a politician, you can't trust her. But historically, she has stood up against Wall Street banks, and now she seems to be arm in arm with them.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think there's a lot of people in Congress that get into Congress campaigning on certain issues, and then once they're there long enough, they backtrack completely. There's a lot of examples of that historically and currently in the U.S. for sure. So, I mean, Elizabeth Warren is garbage. The DNC got all this money, from Sam Bankman-Fried? You know, how anti-crypto are they really? I think it's they're willing to play ball and set up regulation.
Okay. What would be?
Or second best level of enthusiasm.
I'm TK, the T in STD Realty. Remember, when you choose us, you're not just choosing a real estate company, you're choosing an experience that is persistent and will follow up with you for the rest of your life.
Daryl here. I put the D in STD. We're absolutely going viral right now because of our second-rate services and our second-best marketing plan. At STD Realty, we've got a burning passion for real estate, and we won't stop until our names are on everyone's list.
What?
Think about it, folks. There are millions of #1 ranked real estate.
No, wait a bit, baby.
We're proud to be your second-best option in
The fuck
town.
is this?
Real estate moves fast. We will be the rash decision you won't regret.
Misplace your paperwork? No problem. We're used to dealing with sticky situations.
And don't worry, we cut our standards like we cut our kids. So if you want a team that will stick with you long after the deal is done,
And you believe in spreading the word?
then come on down to STD Realty.
Please.
We could really use the sales really soon. Like really soon. Remember, when it comes on real estate,
At STD Realty, we're not the best.
but we're not the worst either.
He?
We're number 2.
Who's right? That's about my name. It must be time for me a real estate show. Here we go. TK the Skits are back, and we are in full effect. People are happy. People better be happy after that.
Going on with
Yeah.
I don't really care about all this stuff. You guys don't know anything about the economy or real estate or anything like that. Just entertain us, monkeys.
Monkey
All right,
entertainment.
all right. Well, as long as you subscribe, we'll do it.
Yeah, like, comment, subscribe. I'm double subscribed. Do it yourself. Didn't get to fix the show, though. Didn't get to fix the show.
We subscribe. And,
Yeah, sure.
yeah.
Just watch us and we'll do everything, right?
We flew to Vancouver. Just
Double blue. This is
surprise,
nice.
surprise. CNN and you just say what they don't say.
That's right. You say what they don't. But the reality is that, TK is a really busy realtor, and he's got some serious boots on the ground. He's part of one of, if not the, highest sales volume team in the nation.
Can't say number 1.
Well,
And say it six there.
Right.
We say them.
there's
Well,
no,
it's like creating.
that's right. You're the #1 show at noon on Sundays for Canadian real estate, where people are okay not learning anything.
And that's our story. We're sticking to it. So don't even bother coming up with anything else.
What have you been up to, John?
Yes. What?
Listening to the Mother of All Talk shows with George.
0848195522. That's the number to call. It's free. If you're in the US or Canada, it's also toll free. It's +1 44944
What you
3344.
got?
And if you're in the rest
What you
of
got,
the
mister?
world, 0044 203 966.
I'm gonna get it.
Some comments.
I'm gonna get it.
John Hay Chin says, have you all seen the Little Princess in the garden?
What you got?
And those that support
Hey?
what was
What you got?
Well,
Can I see?
and Forrest,
Let me see.
1969, say British idea was posted on TikTok that he got a Gazan woman to
Yes.
leave her flat.
Is that your ball? Can I see your
Then
ball?
went to her underwear,
Wow.
called her,
What a
and
nice
blew
ball.
up her apartment in the UK. And Greyhall that China has built 35,000 kilometers of high-speed
Oh, I'm
railway
gonna get it.
in 10 years. We can't even manage 200 miles to Birmingham. And Thomas Randall said,
Oh.
let's hope the guidance system of our nuclear weapons is
Oh.
not made by Fujitsu. And I'll pack up my bag so
Oh.
original peanuts aren't actually nuts.
Oh.
There we're going. That's almost a philosophical question for which anti-play grateful. Christina is in Germany on Julian Assange. Let's hear from her. Christina, welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Darren. Please help me a little bit with the language because my English is not the best. So,
Don't worry, you're doing well so far.
and I'm not very, I don't know what to do now. Ask me.
What do you want to say about Julian? Just speak up.
Oh, well, I'm concerned with Julian's case more than 4 years. And we are doing weekly vigils in Baden-Baden, Germany, for his freedom. And now you certainly know that on February 20th, 21st, there will be the last High Court hearing in his case. And we are very afraid of the result of that. We are afraid that he will die in prison, having nothing done but publish the truth. That's the problem.
Yes, I'm of course involved in this case from day one. It's a very real fear that you have, very well justified one. I believe that British judges are the least corrupted institution in Britain. But that doesn't mean they're not corrupt. They're not as corrupt as the Parliament, as the media, as some of the police forces are. But they are clearly still open to pressure from the government, even from a foreign government like the United States. So there is cause for concern, cause for fear that Julian will be sent to the United States. I had hoped, still hope, that one of Biden's election campaign teasers to please libertarian people, to please some liberal people, would be to drop the charges against Julian, obviating the need for these British judges to take a stand. It's the end of the road at the third week in February. Julian will be off forever. We'll never see him again. We'll never see his face. We'll never hear his voice. We'll never read another word that he has written if this judgment goes the wrong way. So everyone is being encouraged, and will certainly advertise.
Oh, I think you got it a long time ago.
To be there outside the court on the day.
Could be another Epstein thing.
Evident that
Like, I don't think Julian
great
Maxwell's in
number
fucking
of
jail.
people, to say the least, in Britain, including some who previously were not on board. And
You fucking
that's after all
fled.
the point of a campaign.
I just don't think they
to
were
persuade
fucking on
people
track.
that you haven't yet persuaded that they
I don't
should
think
be
fucking,
there
I don't think people were gonna let that shit go. They're
outside
gonna fucking
the High
hunt the
Court
zero.
of justice. We're worried about it just as much as you are, Christina. Maybe even more because this will be yet another indelible mark of shame on Britain if we capitulate to the extradition of Julian Assange. Kate is in Washington. Let's hear from her on Palestine. Go ahead, Kate.
Hi, George. God, I love you so much. I'd like to introduce you and your audience to a fella, a Palestinian, named Mahmoud. It's Mahmood. And then if you put space O-D, he's on YouTube. Mahmoud O.D. He's got amazing sources and daily updates with completely new information that's not available anywhere else.
And is he in Palestine right now?
He is in London right now, in the neck of the woods, and I love it. If you would contact him through his information, he's got his direct email address. You can find it through going to the YouTube channel and getting the address from that. And he's
We'll
very
definitely
sure.
do that, Kate. Yeah, tell us more.
Yeah, he's very sure Palestine is absolutely winning the struggle, and he has many sound reasons to back it up. And like for instance, he actually drew diagrams and talked about why the tunnels, for instance, this was a while back, could not be flooded. The Palestinian engineers expected Israel to try that, and so right from the get-go, they were made so that they could not be flooded. So all of that was bullshit. Was not real. I'd like to add, the more I know about the Palestinians, the more I'm in awe of them. They are the finest example of humanity I know of.
Well, I think many of us share that view. It wasn't their choice that it should be so. They didn't choose for their country to be colonized by European settlers. They did not choose the religion of the European settlers that colonized them. All they knew was that people came from Europe and took their land, took their houses, drove them out of their own country, and an uncountable number of cases killed them. And because they refused to accept it, as any self-respecting person, to think about it, would do, if someone came to your house and took it over, allowed you to live in the back garden in a tent, but periodically bombed that tent, or drove you out of the garden periodically into neighboring gardens nearby. If your children were born as refugees outside or displaced people inside, well, someone else enjoyed your garden, its flowers, its fruits, and so on, you'd be pretty sore about it.
Yeah.
And you'd probably, faced with such a sea of trouble, take up arms and by opposing, seek to end them. That's all that the Palestinians have done. And they're the only legal actors in this whole picture. They're the only people with the law, international law, on their side. They have a legal right, one would argue a moral obligation, but definitely a legal right to take up arms and resist people who have illegally occupied their country for well over half a century. In many cases, Kate Frankel called rash lucky, because we've got to have solidarity amongst ourselves. We can't have difference in opinion. On the topic is Palestine state. And Claude Reed said months ago, I remember George insisting that America runs the USA and not the other way around. Is George still of that view? I don't know how one could be. Yeah, I absolutely believe that Israel is a creature of empire. First the British Empire, and now the American Empire. Robert Kennedy is right when he says that Israel is our unsinkable aircraft carrier, in the middle of the Arab world. But that doesn't mean, and I've never said otherwise, that there is not, I was going to call it unhealthy, but that seriously understates it, that there is not a deeply sick problem in American democracy, that people whose only interest is the interest of Israel are able to, by one means or another, persuade U.S. lawmakers to forfeit America's own interest in favor of their client state. But there's still a client state. Let me put it, if you like, as bluntly as I can. If Joe Biden turned off the money tomorrow, if he turned off the weapons tomorrow, if he voted that the Security Council of the United Nations tomorrow in a totally different way than the way that the U.S. has done for as long as I've been involved in this issue, which is over 50 years, it would make the situation of the state of Israel untenable. So the U.S. has the power. It has the power to stop this, but it will not use it. And in an election year, Biden is absolutely terrified of which way the chips would fall if he were to come out of the closet and state publicly that this cannot go on any longer and that it must stop right away. And no more money, and no more weapons, and no more protection to the international public will be afforded to Netanyahu forward. So, thanks anyway for the question. Declan is in Dublin on the Birmingham protest. Go ahead, Declan.
Well, George, I listened to you there speak quite passionately about Birmingham, and I had no intention of attending that march because I'm in Dublin. However, in favour of you, there's a couple of things about yourself you didn't mention, and one of them is that you brought a huge convoy to Gaza. That's part of your resume. There's the Mariam, and there's also when you wipe the floor on Capitol Hill. Now those three things, plus your former involvement in the Stop the War movement, would, I imagine, put you on a short list of speakers. Apparently not. Now, if we look, I don't know who spoke in Birmingham, but as your program was proceeding, I checked in on Stop the War, and I wonder today where the Stop the War movement stand on Syria, because it's not on Syria but on Ukraine, because they seem to have got that
Syria
one
was
totally wrong. Their finest hour was when, and I think you were involved, they stopped the RAF bombing Damascus. But not just the Stop the War movement, but the ordinary English person now who marched in very big and very impressionable, impressive numbers. Now, the last few days in Birmingham and other countries, young English girls, and I include young Muslim girls in that, were reading poems and giving it their best shot to help the Palestinians. And the question is, for them, Stop the War, would you have been an asset or a liability? And many people would say you would be an asset. However, with the Stop the War and over your programs over the last couple of years, you have drawn attention to how their balloon has been deflated quite a lot. And if you go back to Syria, where I had some involvement, they actually wouldn't allow a known base in Syria to speak at their meeting, and they allowed a so-called member of the Labour Party, not the two in the cabinet, and Jeremy Scahill from America to speak, who I'd say are just sensationalists. I certainly wouldn't want them. I don't think they contribute to any political party, now to any political movement. So the Stop the War chaplains have a couple of very serious questions to ask themselves. And also here on this little island, I was looking at Wes Streeting or whatever that fella's name is in the British Labour Party. And he was, when people try to corner him, he goes on about the two-state solution, and he doesn't believe any of that. The way I see it in England, in France, where newly appointed members of the cabinet were with some colourful personal history in Ireland, Sweden, Holland, and Germany, and other places, is we like the Mamluks in Egypt, where the Ottomans, with America, had put all these half-wits in charge of us. And however they manage it, they seem to keep the whole of Western Europe as emasculated, as powerless, and ultimately as contemptible as the Mamluks were. So that's my
yeah, very, very powerful. Thank you for the content that you said. If any or all of the reasons that were variously offered for leaving me standing in front of unable to deliver my speech, if any or all of them were justification, and none of them are, then why was Chris Williamson banned? Chris Williamson has never said a thing about the Albanian Democrat. He's never got nothing whatsoever to do with Vladimir.
You gotta wait a minute.
Or with China. So why was he banned from speaking? And the answer is that from the beginning, and I should know, I was one of the founders. The Stop the War Coalition was controlled by a very small group of Trotskyites of different stripes, and stripes which have changed as of necessity, as they were expelled as Trotskyites do from their various factions. And these people maintain an ironclad control over an organization that should be as wide as it's possible to be. The point I made earlier, if a Tory MP from the governing party had turned up to give his support to the demand to cease fire in Gaza, are you really saying that because of his views on X, Y, and Z, you would not allow him to do so? Because that's the logic of your position, and it would render you null and void as an anti-war coalition or as a Palestine solidarity campaign, because it would say that you only want people who agree with you on all other matters and have agreed with you at all other times. And therefore, you are not seriously trying to get a ceasefire in Gaza. You're using Gaza. You're using these dead children for your own ultra-left Trotskyite projects. Plural, because the projects are not quite what they were different in Dublin. Blood boiling all over again. Cora is being martyred on Julian Assange and war. Let's hear from her. Cora, welcome.
Hi, Georgia. Hi, Nathan O'Neill. Just to continue what you were saying about if you don't agree with everything that I'm saying, you're banned. These rape charges that were brought against Julian were designed to set us all up so that the majority of sane people didn't get behind the movement and say, not in my name. Julian told me what's done in my name, and why aren't I allowed to know what's done in my name? This is made very to copy you, but it's made my blood boil from the very beginning that when Julian was taken, he had to present himself obviously initially and go into hiding, but he was forced to do that. And then the absolute fiasco of pushing
They locked him in a room for so long that he literally smeared shit on the walls.
Not ending civilization with their contempt for our rule of law. George, I mean, the list is endless. But would you humour me if I just read out a wee poem I've, written very recently?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I dedicated actually to the unknown princess because it begins from a small child's perspective of war. So it's named hostage number A9379AY. When I was just a little girl, I dreamed a soldier came to us, our doorstep full of presents of a man with his gun. He knelt down and he said to me, "Don't run, but fetch your family. I hate to think how they were free before I called their names." Each stood around the door. Gunman explained to me the score. "Choose one of you to live," he said. "The rest of you will be dead." Now, only 49, a publisher taken out of time his crime to tell us all the truth of what happens in our name. He asks not monetary reward, so he has billions he can hoard. No sexing up or bloody sin, so why is that a cage he's in? Alone in Belmarsh, forced to stay 23 fucking hours a day. A rapist is all the liars say who took us all to war. Julian gives us all an incredible gift. So he is going round the twist. He's lonely, sad and deeply sore. He must be free. We must do more. The little girl cries in the night. She wakes up to a different plight. The soldier's gone, and in his place a man who changed the human race.
Very, very beautiful, Cora, and I'm grateful to you for delivering it so well. It's not a small thing, what they did to Julian right at the start, and it was the start. The fake rape allegation are what has been used to imprison him, to incarcerate him. He was guilty of nothing except breaking his bail. What did he break his bail on? He broke his bail on the fake rape charges because he knew that if he was sent to Sweden, Sweden would pass him on to the United States of America. Any fool ought to have been able to see that. I saw it from the first minute. And of course, since these fake rape charges have facilitated this long agony of Julian Assange, the same fake kind of charges have been visited on all kinds of other people. Whatever happened to the 1 hour special on Russell Brand, for example, which dominated the television network, dominated the front pages for weeks.
Yeah, it was like 3 people who were anonymous.
Anyone seen any charges against Russell Brand? No, but they fairly put him out of the game that he was doing very well and very good work on, didn't it? You fools that went along with that. You fools that couldn't see how obvious it was that the US was behind these fake rape allegations in Sweden. The same US that made plans to kill Julian in Knightsbridge if he walked out of the Ecuadorian embassy. You fools that supported and allowed yourselves to be divided on feminist and other issues against a man who's practically a living saint, a living martyr, a man who should be in the pantheon of heroes, and instead is emaciated, wasting away, going round the twist,
look at what's his name?
in Belmarsh jail. Angry, moi, coming up after a short break, is a very great man indeed.
Nelson Mandela.
Before, but once you've seen him, you'll look for him again. I promise you. Top jazz. after this break.
Many people today struggle with the common mainstream media groups. These types of people are mindless zombies. Instead of living authentically, they feed on masking their true thoughts and feelings with nothing and criticizing those who actually do their research. These type of media consumer can be highly manipulative. So here are some golden standard clapbacks when they start with their propaganda. When they say you are too much for them, show them the mirror and tell them to look for less. Or a diagram of where your business skills and their business skills to visually show them they're in the wrong area. When they say, please watch this clip of this reputable BBC journalist, remind them that there are no longer any reputable BBC journalists, and instead watch the mother of all talk shows with some real journalism. Next time you encounter a brainwashed zombie, hold your head high and let their obsession ease your brain. It's masking their jets in your confidence, your freedom and self-expression, and most importantly, your authenticity. Keep listening to learn more of the mother of all talk shows.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
More than 25,000 people have now voted in our poll. Should Joe Biden, serving in the Israeli Defense Force, face war crimes charges? Yes or no, simple question. A lot of people now voted. Get your vote in before about 20 minutes. Wide open. Telephone US and Canada +1 844 944 3334. UK and Ireland 0808 196 522. Rest of the world 44 203 966 2625. Doc Jazz is a surgeon, an author, a musician, and an activist. Oh, and by the way, he's also Palestinian. He's got it all. He's the man with the plan. Let's go to him. Doc, welcome to the Mother of All Talk Shows. I'm a big admirer of yours. We'll talk about your music later, but let's start with the deadly serious stuff. Where do you think the Palestinians are now that nobody is coming to their aid? The Israeli government has made it clear that whatever any court, whatever any politician said, they're going to continue the slaughter. We are people that have been besieged and bloodied for so very long.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'm, by the way, very honored to be on your show. I'm a big fan. I watch twice a week, so it's quite a thing to somebody to be on here. Yeah, this is, of course, a very good question, a very important one, too, because it relates to the effect of that huge surprise that happened on that.
Ooh. Interesting.
It's like the Garden of Eden. It's a real place.
How do you know it's a real place?
Oh my god, just you're a real person.
You're gonna have
Since they first appeared in the 18th century, Freemasons speculation and aroused fantasy in Europe and across the globe. With their enigmatic laws, secret rituals, and supposed influence in the political and economic world, No other organization has generated as much fascination and hostility.
What?
They say that Freemasonry is
Yeah,
secretive.
give me like 5 minutes.
It's
We'll go.
discreet. With World War II, this hostility came to a head. Convinced that the Freemasons held political and esoteric secrets, the Nazis launched mass robberies of European Masonic lodges in occupied countries.
Were there esoteric documents in these archives? Yes.
To have possession of the secret archives of the Freemasons was to fight from within to destroy their influence.
It's the largest collection of Masonic archives that's ever been brought together in the world.
What became of them? What do they contain? Our investigation unveils the secrets of the Freemasonry Archive's incredible journey. June 14th, 1940. The victorious German army enters Paris. The capital is declared an open city. Like Belgium and Holland, France has fallen into Hitler's clutches.
What happened in Paris in 1940 is the German army arrived. When an army arrives in a city, it tries to neutralize and then occupy the centers of power. And in the mind of the Nazi leaders, power in France was located in the ministries, the government, the political parties, but also Freemasonry.
The Nazis rounded up tons of sensitive documents,
Because they're easy.
foreign affairs departments, trade unions, and also Masonic lodges.
The Freemasons are often associated with the French Third Republic, and rightly so. From the very beginning of Nazi occupation, the French lodges were occupied by German military police.
Dieser Logentempel wurde von unseren Truppen in Paris entdeckt. Die internationalen Freimaurer umgaben sich auch hier mit kindischer Symbolik und albernem Prunk. Hinter dieser Tarnung verbargen sie die großen politischen und wirtschaftlichen Transaktionen, die einer kleinen Clique von Bürokraten, Finanz- und Waffenschiebern riesige Gewinne verschafften. Ganze Völker aber den Elend preisgaben.
The Wehrmacht and Gestapo broke into the most important Masonic lodges: the Grand Orient of France, the Grand Lodge of France, and the Bois Lumin. In Paris and Bordeaux alone, there were up to 50 raids. The operation was repeated in the provinces between June 1940 and February 1941. The entire recorded history of French Freemasonry disappeared.
In the imagination of the extreme right, and especially the Nazis, it was the idea that in Western Europe, Freemasonry was pulling the strings of liberal democracy. And there was definitely this idea that they would find information that would explain the resistance of Western democracies to the new European order.
With his rise to power in 1933 in Germany, Hitler ordered that all Masonic societies be dissolved.
Did you know that Google is the first place shoppers look for new products?
That's great.
In just a few steps, you can add your products to start reaching shoppers on search, YouTube, and the web. Add your products to Google for free, then promote them to reach even more customers, so you can get discovered by shoppers looking for products just like yours. Start growing your business with Google today.
What? Yeah, we're gonna go. Mike, what's the matter?
Pflanzen science, we knew that everything was mud.
The father was not forsaken. Giants have been found in the Midwest. Ishi no Ho to refer to as a
Water?
floating ship.
He would put repressive policies in place in all occupied countries, but especially France, where there were 49,000 active Freemasons. In occupied zones, Masonic lodges were immediately closed, and arrests took place, especially of people who had held positions in Freemasonry. While newspapers were placing the blame for the military defeat on Freemasonry, the Germans continued their methodical robbing.
Plundering was entrusted to various Nazi agencies, each with its own agenda. First, the RSAJ Intelligence Service, which merged several services, including the infamous Gestapo. They were the ones who first visited the lodges to seize the documents. And then there was also Alfred Rosenberg's military staff. Rosenberg himself was not a policeman. He was an ideologist. He was the linchpin of the denunciation of Jewish Freemasonry, of Judeo-Bolshevism. And starting in July 1940, Hitler entrusted Rosenberg with the mission of searching the libraries and archives of enemies of the regime. And that's what he did.
The Germans took all of our archives. What they were interested in finding varied according to who was in charge. Everyone knows that men like Rosenberg were especially attentive to anything esoteric and to the inherent spirituality of Freemasonry.
At once anti-Semitic, anti-Catholic, and anti-Freemason, Alfred Rosenberg was a conspiracy theorist who believed that occult powers ruled the world. He wanted to produce evidence. In the summer of 1940, Rosenberg's military staff raided the Masonic archives. Conspiracy theories stoked the flames of the National Socialist worldview. But there was also a pagan branch of regime officials who wanted a new religion. This mystical movement, which was a mixture of Nordic myths and ancient cult doctrines, arose from a secret racist organization, the Thule Society, which had influenced the Nazi Party from its inception. The Thule Society was actually formed by a breakaway Masonic law, meaning it operated totally independently and was very much into esotericism. The Nazis were attracted to its philosophy and took inspiration from it. Founded in 1918, Thule's members included future key figures of the regime such as Rudolf Hess, Hitler's right-hand man, Hermann Goering, and of course, Alfred Rosenberg. The Thule symbol even inspired Hitler with his sinister swastika. This didn't prevent him from subsequently dissolving the group, which was too fanatical in his eyes. Alfred Rosenberg was faithful to the teachings of the Thule Society and remained convinced that the Freemasons' archives held tremendous secrets, like the alchemist's philosopher's stone, believed to have the power to transform lead into gold. But to focus solely on Rosenberg's obsession with the occult would be to forget that the archives also held great political importance.
The Germans took over the headquarters of the Grand Orient on Rue Cadet taking hold of the archives. All of this lasted for weeks, months. And then after a while, the Vichy regime was set up and there were discussions between Vichy and the Germans. Vichy said we should handle the Freemasons. We still have authority over some sectors of the occupied zone, and therefore it's our responsibility. And that means all of the Freemasons' belongings and archives should be transferred to us.
On August the 13th, 1940, secret societies were banned. And at that point, the Secret Societies Department was created, which was partly based at the National Library. The idea was to document both the current affairs of Freemasonry, so there was intelligence carried out by the police, and then it was also about referencing, creating a library for the future.
The director of the Secret Societies Department was Bernard Fay, an anti-Mason historian. He published a monthly anti-Masonic newsletter, and with the help of 100 zealous employees, he exploited archives left behind by the Germans. Fay and his team kept records on 150,000 people from all the Masonic obediences, often taking things to the absurd. They even kept files on thousands of members who were long dead.
They kept extensive files on each of the 15,000 members of the Grand Lodge of France, which included their identity card, the functions they held in the lodge, their political leanings, their union activity, their beliefs relative to the values of the Republic. Sometimes the content of these records was extremely damaging. The civil servants all lost their jobs and some were prosecuted and deported.
Et au-delà de maçonnique, donc une première liste vient d'être également publiée, ne pourront plus exercer aucune fonction publique.
Il va y avoir la légalisation de l'interdiction.
The Vichy regime declared a ban on secret societies, not only banning their existence, but also seizing all of their property. This was the first major anti-Masonic law, and all civil servants were required to declare if they'd ever been a Freemason, and swear they'd never re-enter a Masonic lodge if ever Freemasons were to start again in France.
Vichy enlisted turncoat Masons to collaborate with the Secret Societies Department. Using the archives and lodges, they created an anti-Masonic film based on the Freemason rituals of that era.
Renoncez avec moi le serment, je m'engage sur l'honneur, aux sciences le plus absolu, sur tous les autres épreuves pour aboutir je m'y engage. Vous devez connaître toute l'importance. Si jamais vous manquez cette parole, ou si cela n'est vous donner, le symbole de la vertu et du remords, laissez en votre cœur le pardonner, j'aurais signé vos lèvres. Le respect, emparez-vous de
In the Petit Palais, there was a big anti-Masonic exhibition, the first of its kind, prepared both by Vichy and the German embassy. It was a great success in Paris, and then traveled to Bordeaux and other cities around France.
À Lyon s'est ouverte une exposition de la franc-maçonnerie à l'exemple de celle de Paris. En peu de temps, les visiteurs ont pu, après un regard au sphinx de l'entrée, Visiter les mœurs étranges des cabinets de réflexion et les temples différents qu'abrite chaque loge. Ils ont pu examiner les insignes et les objets, les prophéties macabres qui servaient aux initiations et aux réunions de ces sociétés secrètes, dont le sens s'était perverti et que l'État français a désormais interdite en raison des maux qu'il a causés au pays.
Belgian Freemasons were subject to the same persecution as their French brothers. Parts of their archives were pillaged by the Germans and the rest were used by Belgian collaborators, the Brexit, who settled in their lodges. The hunt was on. The Rexists were a far-right political party led by Leon de Grain, created before the war. De Grain wrote something in his journal which resembled, besides eliminating the Jews, we will be nowhere if we don't also eliminate the Freemasons. Here, the same sinister tasks were carried out.
Did you guys actually believe that Hitler on the history fucking...
A sculpture commemorates 7 Freemasons who, in the Estavagen concentration camp, created the Liberté Chérie Lodge. We don't know how many Masons were arrested. We know how many were deported, shot, or died in prison, or were killed in battle in 1940. This figure is a little over 800. In France and Europe, persecution of Freemasons was not comparable to that of the Jews. It was mostly for acts of resistance that brothers were deported, like Pierre Bossuet, or those in the network Quatrième Récupéré. Here, hatred for Freemasons reached its horrible culmination.
Anti-Masonry sentiment has existed from the beginning of Freemasonry. It started in 1736 with Pope Clement XII's famous papal bull denouncing the Masons. Masonic conspiracy theories became popular starting in the late 18th century. And in the early 19th century, the theory of the Judeo-Masonic conspiracy began. So these are very old concepts. The first proposition for a law that would prohibit Masonry in France was in 1934. It was debated in the National Assembly, but not adopted.
Okay, but are you guys insinuating that the Freemasons are all Jews? I don't think they are.
The right tended to be hostile or suspicious of Masonry, as was the Catholic Church, especially the high-ranking members. The press was also hostile, especially during the Stavisky affair.
The Stavisky affair, a financial and political scandal that nearly brought down the Republic in 1934, named after a swindler who had Freemasons among his many accomplices. The Secret Societies Department scoured the archives attempting to prove involvement of the lodges, but in vain. They did find, however, proof of Freemasonry's widespread political influence, especially under the French Third Republic. Meanwhile, the Germans began sorting their thousands of Masonic boxes, just a portion of millions of plundered archives from all over Europe.
We usually think that the Jewish books and the art, all the very famous Jewish art collections,
from the front were the first things that were taken and the most important things that were taken. As it turns out, actually, it was the Masonic archives that were the first cultural property that were taken by, I just have to stop right beside Rosenberg. And he reported to Berlin that, oh, there's so many archives and cultural treasures that are left behind. We must take these immediately to Germany.
The Nazi war machine was now in full swing. But for the Germans, the study of the archives was still considered important from a strategic standpoint.
Why did the Germans confiscate Masonic archives? Because in the mind of the Nazis, Freemasons were one of the four powers that opposed Nazism and totalitarianism, along with the Jews, communists, and Democrats. The Germans were highly organized. They wanted to study their enemies.
What is this?
Alfred Rosenberg gave his delusions an intellectual gloss, creating an institute in Frankfurt that was dedicated to the Jewish question, along with an annex to study the Freemasons and parts of their archives.
Alfred Rosenberg had a very strong competitor, namely Himmler, who directed the secret services for state security, and Himmler happened to have been very interested in Masons. It was Himmler's group that decided that they should be heir to many of the Masonic materials that were captured by the ERR. They had set up a research center for Masonic studies. And the large Masonic buildings include the largest German Masonic lodges in Berlin that were taken over by the Nazi regime because Masons were one of the first to sell them in Germany. These buildings became the headquarters for the Gestapo. But in the basement, they set up bomb-proof shelters for the hard drives of the materials that they had collected, first of all from lodges all over Germany, and then of course from France also, and from other countries in the West, Belgium, and the Netherlands.
The boxes of archives were meticulously indexed by SS officers, Freemasonry specialists, historians, and a team of translators. Nevertheless, they were overwhelmed by the mass of thousands and thousands of documents, ranging from notes taken in 18th century meetings to early 20th century conferences on anti-fascism. A wealth of information for the specialists. But there was little time to make use of these files.
Starting in 1942 and especially by 1943, the Allies began heavily bombing Germany, and so they began evacuating into the far-flung regions of the Reich. The Masonic archives were evacuated in part to Tanzenberg, where they were discovered by the Americans. But what makes their story quite incredible is that they were then evacuated to the East, in Poland, and former Czechoslovakia, regions that had fallen under the control of the Nazis.
It was in these medieval castles that the SS hid the secret archives of the Freemasons. Their leader, Himmler, took a portion of them to his fortress, Wilhelmsburg, a place where he conducted strange ceremonies inspired by ancient times.
I have written an article about rather curious research that the Nazis were doing and that Himmler's group were doing in one castle in the Sudetenland, even in 1944, at the very last year of the war. They had a very special research group that were into esoteric disciplines.
Where
and
is
there were
this
about
lady's
40
caretaker?
different disciplines that were being studied in this castle, but there were books on all these occult subjects.
Himmler amassed the largest esoteric library in the world with 13,000 stolen books. Books of spells, alchemical manuscripts, witchcraft trial proceedings. He also seized the documents that he considered most valuable from the European Masonic archives. Clearly, this Holocaust orchestrator, a technocrat of death, also paradoxically believed that the Freemasons held mysterious esoteric powers. Spring 1945, the Red Army and Allied troops destroyed the Third Reich. Once again, many different parties were eager to obtain the millions of archives that had been plundered by the Nazis.
The archives changed hands after a few months because the Allies, the Americans, the British, the French, and the Soviets all scrambled to get their hands on them. This was first of all for military reasons. To obtain operational information, you need to have the enemy's archives. But they all reacted differently. The US gave them back to their original owners, while the Soviets took them to Moscow quite illegally.
Hundreds of thousands of boxes of documents with official information about foreign affairs, military, police, unions, and also about Freemasonry were confiscated by Stalin and secretly sent to Moscow. The Russians were also interested in the Freemasons, not for symbolic or esoteric reasons for which they had no use. It was the brothers' political networks that Stalin and Beria, his henchman, head of the NKVD, the precursor to the KGB, wanted to investigate, to find out whether they had infiltrated the communist parties in pre-war Europe.
Once the archives had been transferred to the Soviet Union, they were not stored in a classic fashion in a university or in the National Archives. They were transferred to an archive department that answered to the KGB. It was called the Central State Archive.
Why would they put them in a university? You guys would steal them back.
Translators were then requisitioned to dissect the archives with orders not to discuss their research with their families, or else they would be sent to Siberia.
Yeah.
By the middle of 1945, there were about 1.5 million of these files on Soviet territory. And it was imperative that their fate be determined as soon as possible. That's why NKVD leadership held a special meeting, where it was decided that they would set up the special archives.
The Russian specialists were overwhelmed by the scope of the spoils taken from Germany, while Europeans remained convinced that these documents had disappeared during the war.
We can say that it was a gulag of archives, in the sense that the archives were actually deported. The veil of secrecy was typical of the Soviet political project and its practices.
There was an agreement between the occupying powers in Germany that the pillaged cultural property would be returned to the original owners who had been robbed. And it's probably unsurprising that the Americans and the English were true to their word. They set up centers where people came looking for what had been taken. Whereas Stalin signed the papers enthusiastically and returned 2 or 3 documents saying, that's all we have. And then he kept it a secret for the next 50 years.
At the dawn of the Cold War, the revival of Freemasonry in European ruling circles worried Stalin.
The Russians were in a state of total paranoia. First, NATO's operational center was in the west, so you can imagine they did everything they could to penetrate it. But it was particularly interesting for them to use masonry, which was strongly represented in
propaganda?
many American, English, and French members.
My goodness.
It's clear now that masonry was a tactic for them to penetrate that environment.
Please stop saying the word penetrate.
The Special Archives existed for 53 years, from 1946 until 1999. Most of the documents have been studied, translated, summarized, standardized, cataloged, and the time had come to make the records public.
With Stalin gone, all of the archives that had been taken in Germany, Masonic or otherwise, were forgotten for nearly half a century.
Guess they weren't that
After the
important.
fall of communism, they resurfaced thanks to the work of a stubborn American researcher, Patricia Grimstead, who rediscovered them.
The role of Patricia Grimstead in this affair is central, since she's the one who knew about these archives and pursued them, with very little evidence. And as you know, she was announced as a spy. The former Soviets were not very happy with her discoveries. She played an absolutely critical role.
It was at the end of 1990 in October, and I was working with a Ukrainian colleague who was allowed to go into the stacks, came up running to me and said, "Oh dear, I can't do this anymore because of all these signatures of Beria that I've seen."
Lavrenti Beria, nicknamed the Russian Himmler, the man behind the torture and deportations of any and all who challenged communism.
So it was about a week later that I was given permission to go back in the stacks and see more of these files. I found a top secret folder about the seizure by SMERSH, the Soviet counter-espionage group. Beria had sent instructions for a special team to go to a small village in the Sudetenland. This was in May 1945. They brought 28 freight car train wagons, sealed, of course, of French archives.
Introducing Walmart Delivery Pass. Get unlimited next day deliveries. We mean unlimited. For $8.97 a month or $89 a year. Plus, get 30 days free when you sign up. Subscribe today.
The countries that had fallen victim to the Nazis were shaken to the core by these findings, as they discovered that whole sections of their collective memory had landed in the hands of the Russians. The Freemasons were alerted.
As soon as I had confirmation that Masonic archives existed somewhere in Moscow, I organized a special group. They discovered that there were roughly 28,000 files. The boxes were numbered and well organized, as you can imagine would be the case of the Soviet administration of the time.
The talks began very quickly. France organized missions, both diplomatic but also secret services, to take a look at what was there. And from then on, the French archives started being returned. But this was not without resistance. Russian Duma considered these documents to be a national treasure, that they were war.
The affairs minister was Laurent Fabius. I had some contact with his office, and so I knew they were reluctant. Reluctant because the Russians had a hard time returning what they'd taken from others, but from the Nazis in particular, throughout the entire history of the Soviet Union.
The Duma didn't refuse the transfer. It was just suspended.
Yes, the funded archives is still a sensitive issue for Russia, as is the entire memory of the Second World War, in fact. It's become a major focus of political discourse for Vladimir Putin. It's a sensitive issue because it brings to the forefront the way that Soviet practices were not necessarily in keeping with international law. Nor did they respect their allies at the time, since France and the USSR were allies. There was no reason not to return 18th century archives to France.
The collection contained France's Masonic documents, but also the archives of many other departments. When all lined up, the documents of the French police alone represented 6 kilometers. There were also the documents of political parties, unions like the CGT, the private correspondence of notable figures such as Leon Blum, not to mention the archives of the Protestant Federation and Human Rights League.
I wrote a letter to President Chirac dated November 26, 1997, asking him to intercede on our behalf to recover these archives. The idea was to influence his counterpart, President Yeltsin of the Russian Federation. From the moment the president became involved, things became much easier thanks to his exacting manner.
France paid 4 million francs, which was not negligible at that time, that the Russians, since it was no longer the USSR by this point, had asked for, in order to microfilm documents that interested them, to pay for the packaging and the creation of an inventory list, as they would be sending all of this to France in trucks. What became of this money remains a mystery.
In Moscow, the diplomatic maneuvering of the European embassies intensified as each fought to recover a lost past. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Norway began working on discreet negotiations and secret deals.
At the end of 1999, we were warned that the archives could soon be returning to France, and we began to have meetings with the Foreign Ministry's archive management director, who orchestrated the logistics of the returns. We were informed just days before that the hundreds of archive boxes would arrive by truck on December 23rd at Rue Cadet.
The Grand Orient of France, the Grand Lodge of France, and the Droit Humain were all reunited with their missing archives, as were the lodges in Belgium.
And so we unpacked these boxes in a rather extraordinary atmosphere, because December 23rd was the decoration of the Grand Orient Christmas tree, so there were lots of children running around. We brought the boxes up, and then we closed the door of the library, and we began to open the 750 boxes. Just a small group of us, people from the library, my colleagues, and me. And then something extraordinary happened. We opened the box, pulled out a file, and we see Les Neuf Sœurs, which was the legendary lodge of the 18th century, whose members included Benjamin Franklin and Voltaire. All of the archives had disappeared, probably at the time of the Revolution of the early 19th century. So we had practically no documentation. A 19th century author wrote a huge book about the lodge, and he said, I'm writing this with no reference documents. And so here we find Les Neuf Sœurs, and we said, if the rest of the 750 boxes are like this, we're not going to survive.
At the Grand Lodge of France, it was the sisters of the Women's Grand Lodge who combed through the archives. As in other lodges, they found manuscripts of rituals dating from the origins of Freemasonry, international correspondence such as letters of the Marquis de Lafayette, and documents detailing the everyday life of the lodges.
Okay. Well, that first part we freaking out. Nice.
A collection of documents that shine a new light on the role of Freemasonry from the Enlightenment right up until World War II.
I'm very happy to see them in the home where they belong, because I have been working with the archivist from the Grand Orient when I first learned about the Masonic archives in Moscow. So for me, it's a great pleasure and a great sense of satisfaction for seeing them here.
Were there esoteric documents in these archives? Yes. Not in every one of the 750 boxes, but there were boxes of archives dating back to the 18th century. And in the 18th century, there were several branches of Freemasonry. A branch that was very in line with the Enlightenment, like that of Les Neuf Sœurs, inspired by the ideas of Voltaire or Rousseau. Then there was the Illuminist branch, which was interested in the secrets of existence, with the unknown. And in their papers, we found some very important documents on an esoteric figure of the 18th century called Martinus de Pasquali, a sort of wizard we don't know much about, who taught a kind of Judeo-Christian Kabbalah.
Martinez de Pasquali, one of the great enigmas of Freemasonry. He appeared in the middle of the 18th century and founded a new Masonic order where brothers who were occult enthusiasts could practice magic. But to reduce the Freemasons to such esoteric practices would be to indulge in fantasies just as the Nazis did.
The archives are also a great way to demystify Freemasonry, especially for those who didn't know much about it, and show that we were vital to the European culture that crystallized around the 18th century. A culture that continues, or should continue, to inspire us.
God. Yeah, we're going. Go for a walk.
What fascinates the Freemasonry,
Go for a walk.
and it continues to attract new candidates, is indeed its esoteric and symbolic side. If it still works as well as it does today, it's because in the last decades we've seen a decline in religion. And those who go to the lodges find a spirituality there that they can't find elsewhere.
Yeah. Come here, hang on. Okay, okay.
Hospitalizations, and overall cases to things like closures, social distancing, and travel restrictions. The study found that travel restrictions reduced the rate of increase in the number of cases by 10% and school closures by 8%, while masking reduced the number of deaths by 0.2%. The Quebec Order of Pharmacists has suspended a Joliette pharmacist for 2 months after it was revealed that he was looking at his former girlfriend's medical records for no reason. The press reports that Mikhail Guy went into his ex's records 38 times between 2020 and 2022. That sort of thing is prohibited by the order.
Yeah, well, no.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has suspended his Republican U.S. presidential campaign ahead of Tuesday's New Hampshire primary and endorsed former U.S. President Donald Trump.
Oh my God.
DeSantis announced he's dropping out of the race in a video.
Oh,
Today
wow.
suspending my campaign. I'm proud to have delivered on 100% of my promises, and I will not stop now. It's clear to me that a majority of Republican primary voters want to give Donald Trump another chance. Watch his presidency get stymied by relentless resistance, and we see Democrats using lawfare this day to attack him.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Well, I've been hearing it since it's on.
Just turned it on.
The United Nations is highlighting the suffering
On
of
earlier.
civilians caught in Gaza. Gaza's health ministry now reporting more than 25,000 deaths since the start of the war between Israel and Hamas. The updated figure comes shortly after UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on Saturday discussed the war and the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza.
People are dying not only from bombs and bullets, but from lack of food and clean water.
Hospitals without power and medicine.
Guterres called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and sovereignty for Palestinians in post-war Gaza. Mark Remillard, ABC News. And Ottawa skaters, break out your blades. The Rideau Canal has finally reopened.
People were allowed back onto the canal's gateway at 12:30 Sunday afternoon, bringing back a tradition that's been on ice, even as Ottawa residents weren't. This gateway had been out of commission since the end of the 2022 season because last year's unusually warm winter meant it shut down for the whole season for the first time in its history. The section currently open to skaters is about half as long as what the National Capital Commission first said when it announced the reopening. This gateway is open for a roughly 1 kilometer stretch between Bank Street and Fifth Avenue, and the NCC says more ice will be cleared for use as safety conditions improve. Michelle, the Canadian Press.
And now heading up to the CJAP 800 Traffic Center. Good afternoon, Mark Salute.
Good afternoon, Don. As we have folks coming back from Cottage Country, St. Adele down to 15 through until St. Jean-de-Lac. It's about half an hour, 18 minutes. If folks want to bypass it via the 117 and some brake tapping on the Laurentian on Route 15 at Highway 15 in Mirabel, and just on the approach to the Met, which is busiest between 250, a little slow past the Piscop Cologne as it is on the eastbound side of the Laurentian on Route emergency until Santa Ana carries south at the Jean Talon entrance. Minor slowdown through until Plamondon, as is the case as well, merging 15 north.
Oh, yeah. I don't know why I didn't tell you last night.
On the 10 west, that's
On the way to Dom's, I had to stop because two teenagers ran into the wall. On the money.
That's you got on your car?
Yeah. Well, I parked. No, I parked sideways because there was a woman who stopped because they hit the wall in the left lane. So the woman stopped on the behind them, and then I went diagonally so that people had to go around the back of my car. But I just got out and I just fucking tapped on his window because they weren't moving. We're still in the front seat. I was like, hey, are you awake? And he was like, yeah. I was like, you're okay? He was like, yeah, we're okay. I was like, okay, good, bye. This lady seems to have got this problem better than I do. I am not 911. It was just what do you call it? Usually I would not have gotten out of the car, especially if someone else is helping, but no one else was doing anything. People were just driving around the car.